So I'm going to walk you through how to use your Create a Color wheel. I've got a blank wheel here that I've put together just to give you an idea of how it works. We've got two sides to the wheel, two larger circles that fit together back to back, and two smaller circles that rotate around this center pin. So just to give you an idea of the mechanism and how this is going to work. This color wheel is going to introduce you to color mixing terms, some different definitions, reiterate what we went over in class, talk to you a little bit about values and the relationship of values to color with tints, tones, and shades. And then on the back here, we've got our 6 harmonious color schemes that this wheel takes you through and helps you locate all those different harmonies, whether they be triad, analogous, split complementaries, and so on. So this is what you have been handed, this little kit. You can go ahead and open that up. There are instructions inside to help you, examples of different color harmonies, and the process is outlined on each one of these individual pieces of the wheel. So you can go ahead and pop out the central portion for each page, and then you're just going to want to set the outer piece or that frame aside because it has some instructions on it that we want to make sure you can read as you're working through this process. Each of the wheels is labeled with a number in the center, so that should keep you on track as you work. So my first wheel here, wheel number 1, has the title on the wheel. That's how you define it as that first wheel. It also labels it right here for you. So I'm just going to take the corresponding frame and I'm going to read my instructions here. So it tells me to paint designated colors in the space below the color name. So I'm going to paint red, yellow, blue, white, and black, respectively. So I'm just going to put a cover sheet down here over top of my surface. That way I don't have to worry about getting paint on my cutting mat here or whatever surface you are working on. I'll lay out my first wheel here. So I like to be pretty meticulous about this and use tape to make sure that I'm being as clean and professional as possible. So I like to put my tape on either my apron or my pants just to take a little bit of the tack out so it doesn't pull on the paper as I work. So I know I'm just going to line this up with a line that's already existing there. Just double check myself. I know that I've got my red paint first. I'm just going to lay out my palette here. I've got some paper towels at my disposal. I've got my water here, one relatively clean, one with soap, so I can keep my brush nice and clean as I work. I'm just going to take a little bit of red right out of my tube and place it on that first portion of the wheel here. I want a pretty opaque application. But we don't want to put too much paint on, or it's going to keep your wheel from spinning the way that it should. If you don't get an opaque application, you're going to get the luminosity of the paper showing through. And that can sometimes be frustrating when you're trying to see color, the pure form of the color, as opposed to that paper showing through. I'll just give my paintbrush a little wipe, a dunk, and make sure it's nice and clean. I can gently peel my tape off. Always good to go at about a 45-degree angle. You're pulling your paint off so that it does not rip the paper underneath. Get my next block here. Looking at my instructions, yellow. So I'll just work my way through. All of my primaries and white and black. Now that we've completed our first color wheel and it is dry over here, we're going to move on to wheel number 2. So I've just, again, removed the interior portion from the exterior frame, and I'm going to just check my instructions on the outer frame here to see what I need to be doing as I progress with my color wheel. So for row 1, I need to start again with my primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. Red, yellow, blue. And then I need to make sure that I'm choosing a red that doesn't lean toward violet or orange, which is that red, primary red in your paint kit. I need a yellow that doesn't lean toward green or orange, which is that primary yellow. And a blue that doesn't lean toward violet or green, which is that primary blue. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint those in to each one of these sections here. I've got my retarder out because this portion of the project is going to take just a little bit longer. So I want to make sure that if my paint starts to dry, I can start to mix in a little bit of retarder as I go. And again, I'm just going to use my tape here that I've taken a little bit of the tack off to help me create a nice sharp edge. Because my edge here is curved, I'm just going to have to eyeball that one. Just start with my red. So now I have my primary colors laid out on my color wheel. And my next step here is to paint my secondary colors. So to make my orange, I'm going to mix red and yellow until I have a balanced orange that visually appears to be halfway between the red and the yellow. So this is where our mixing ratios come into play. I'm going to take roughly the same amount of my red as my yellow. And this takes practice. You'll just have to be patient with yourself. And I'm going to create an orange that appears to be halfway between my red and my yellow. And I like to place it on my palette where it belongs in relation to its ratio. So halfway between my red and my yellow. And I can clean up after myself here a little bit to make sure I have enough room on my palette. And then I'm going to place that in my orange quadrant here. I'll just reuse some of my tape. Everybody's going to work a little bit differently here as far as your setup for your palette, and that's okay. Find a language that works for you, that is replicable every single time you paint, so that you can get into a rhythm and know where all your colors are, where they lie on the palette, and how that is related to the ratio that you are mixing. Okay, so there's my orange. Now I need to mix a green. Yellow and blue mixed together in equal ratios until I have a balanced green that visually appears to be halfway between my yellow and my blue. I can make a decision here. Does that look like it's halfway between the yellow and the blue? I think I, for my taste, need just a little bit more yellow. That's better. Find my green section here. And lay out my tape. Nice even coat. And then my violet here, mixing blue and red until I have a balanced violet that appears halfway between my red and my blue. So now I'm going to come in and paint what are called my tertiary colors. So for example, a red-orange, the color that would sit on my wheel between my red and my orange. So I'm going to mix red and orange together until I have a balanced red-orange that appears to be halfway between my red and my orange. And I'm going to continue around my circle here, or my wheel, by mixing one primary color with one secondary color, visually judging the colors until I have a color that appears to be halfway between the two. And when my color wheel is finished, the colors are going to appear to be in graduated steps around the wheel. So yellow-orange equals yellow and orange, yellow-green equals yellow and green, blue-green equals blue and green, blue-violet equals blue and violet, red-violet equals red and violet. So this is where I might want to start using my retarder, because I'm going to leave these wells for a little bit and then come back to them. So I might just add a small amount of retarder to each one of my paint wells here. just to make sure that when I come back to them, they are ready to be used and aren't too dry. The nice thing about the retarder is it has a little bit of body to it, so it will keep the viscosity, or at least a similar viscosity to the paint right out of the tube. If you add water, it's going to dilute the paint, disperse the pigment a little bit too much, and you end up with more of a wash, watercolor wash effect, as opposed to that nice thick body paint. All right, so I'm just going to work my way through here, and you can follow along with me as we go. So once I have all of my primaries, secondaries, and tertiary colors painted on my wheel here, I'm actually going to slide on over to wheel number 3, so I can use the same colors that I just mixed for this exercise on wheel 2 on the second row in wheel 3, because I want to make sure that they match up. So everywhere on wheel 3 where I see the name of the color that I just mixed, whether it be a primary, a secondary, or tertiary, I'm going to go in and I'm going to paint those respective blocks with the same colors I've used on wheel number 2. So I'm going to go back to my palette now, and I know my red-orange is between my red and my yellow, okay? My orange here, right, that I mixed with red is going to give me my red-orange, okay? So that's how the palette setup helps you figure out where you are. So there we have both wheel 2 and wheel 3 with our primaries, secondaries, and tertiaries outlined. So then what I'll do while I still have my colors wet is I'll put wheel 3 to the side. I'll move back to color wheel 2. Row 2, I'm going to leave blank. And then to mix my colors for rows 3 to 7, I'm going to use equal parts of each color. For row 3, I'm going to add red to each color in row 1. So this would be row 1. If I add red to that, right, I'm going to get red. If I add red to my red-orange, I'm going to get an even redder red-orange, okay? Row 4, I'm going to add yellow to each color in row 1. Row 5, I'm going to add blue to each color in row 1. Row 6, I'm going to add white to each color in row 1 to create a tint of each color. Row 7, I'm going to add black to each color in row 1 to create a shade of each color. So I'm going to pull out an additional palette here. And you are welcome to use a disposable paper palette for this. So I'll just lay this out on my board here. So row 3, identified here in my black strip or my black spoke coming from the center of the wheel. I'm going to add red to each color in row 1. So I'll take my red. Technically, I'm going to add red. So this strip here will be my primary red. For my red-orange, I'm going to add red. So on and so forth, following the instructions on the bottom right-hand side of my wheel 2 frame. Looks like I need to make some more orange here. No problem. Equal parts yellow and red. Mixed directly back into my orange well. And I can just line it up, see if it matches. And I can do this for any color along the way. Row 4, I'm going to add yellow to each of the colors in row 1. So some of you may have noticed at this point that you are repeating your color mixing, because if I add equal parts red and equal parts yellow, as I'm supposed to do for this next exercise, I'm going to end up with orange. So in the future, you are welcome to just use your well of orange paint. For this particular exercise, I really do want you all to mix as the directions require step by step. I think it's really helpful, even though it does use a little bit more paint, it is really helpful for your brain to understand what's happening with the colors to kind of mix your way through this entire exercise. Row 5, I'm going to add blue to each color in row 1. Row 6, I'm going to add white to each color in row 1, creating what's called a tint of that color. For my last row here, I'm going to add black to each color in row 1 to create a shade of each color. The last wheel that I need to complete is wheel 3, where I'm going to be investigating my tints, tones, and shades. So the first step I need to complete here is already done because I've painted colors as described on wheel 2 in the space below each color name in the outer row. We did this in combination with wheel 2. So I'm going to jump right into number 2 on my wheel 3 instructions. I need to mix white and black to match value 6 and 9 on my grayscale on wheel 1. So value 6 is here. Value 9 is here on wheel 1. And then I'm going to set those larger amounts of paint, value 6 and value 9, aside for mixing my tones. I'm going to start with my value to match value 6. This is a pretty light mid-tone, so I'm going to start in with my white first and add my black slowly to get up to a matching value 6. Make sure my paint is well mixed, all the pigment is dispersed, and figure out whether I think that is more along value 5 lines or value 6. I think I need just a little bit more white. Much better. If you're afraid you're going to forget here, you can just label on your palette. It's one of the nice things about the disposable palettes. So now I'm going to aim for value 9. So I've mixed my values to match value 6 and value 9 on the grayscale on wheel 1. I'm going to set those aside for just a second, and I'm going to use those to mix my tones. So as you look down to the instructions, we're actually going to skip over the tints for a second, and we're going to use the values that we just mixed as part of our tonal process here. So I'm going to locate the tone column on my wheel. In the upper space, I'm going to mix 1 part color with 1 part gray value, 9. And in the lower space, I'm going to mix 1 part color with 1 part gray value, 6. So I'm going to need to mix a primary, secondary, and tertiary color palette to match the colors I have around my circle here in row 1, and then I'll begin adding my tones. So if you are working from your previous palette, you're trying to do your color wheel in one session, you can just dip into the wells of paint that you've already mixed if they are still wet. I'm working over 2 sessions here, so I need to remix my secondaries and my tertiaries. So I'm taking 1 part primary to 1 part primary and mixing my secondaries, and then 1 part primary to 1 part secondary to mix my tertiaries. So now that I'm all mixed, I'll come back in and start to mix my tones. So the upper space, remember, is 1 part color with 1 part gray value 9. The lower space is 1 part color with 1 part gray value 6. So now I've completed my tonal section, and I'm going to go back up to the first part of my directions and do my tints. So in my tint column here, the upper space, I'm going to mix 1 part color with 5 parts white. In my bottom section, I'm going to mix 1 part color with 1 part white.
So for my last part of my color wheel, I need to figure out my shades. For the upper space, I am going to mix 3 parts color with 1 part black. For the lower space, I'm going to mix 1 part color with 2 parts black. Now what I'll do, that I've finished up wheels 1, 2, and 3, is I will clean my path here, I will wait for my wheels to dry, and then I'm going to glue wheels 2 and 3 together, put 1 and 4 on either side respectively, and I will have a fully functioning color wheel. So once my paint has been allowed to dry completely, I carefully punched out the tabs from the various openings on the wheel, following the perforations. You can use a craft knife if you need to make sure the openings are fully removed and trimmed. You are welcome to seal the painted areas with a light application of acrylic finish spray or any non-yellowing sealant, but it's not required. To assemble, I'm going to remove the center hole from each one of my wheels. And from wheels 2 and 3, I'm going to apply a very light application of glue and place the backs of the wheels facing one another. And we want to make sure that the yellow lines up on either side. Now, this is not an essential step, but it can be helpful when you're flipping your wheel back and forth to be able to read it a little bit more fluidly. So just make sure that you have your colors lining up to the best of your ability. Press to make sure there's no air bubbles inside. I like to work from the center out. So we can let the glue completely dry before we place wheel 4 and wheel 1 on either side. Wheel 1 is going to overlay on top of wheel 2. Wheel 4 is going to overlay on top of wheel 3. Line up the holes in the center. Stick the dowel through and place the stopper on the opposite side. Then you have a fully functioning color wheel where you can take cues from each one of the directions here, check your values in relation to a color you are using. If you flip over, you will see your key colors, your 6 harmonious color schemes, analogous harmonies, triads, split complementaries, so on and so forth. And that's how we fill out and complete our Create a Color wheel.